You're in your seat. Thank you. You're in your seat. Thank you. Oh, my wife just sat in Karen Riegel's seat. That's the WBZ seat. So good afternoon. I've just done calls with the National Weather Service and with the National Hurricane Center, and there was also a call that was hosted by President Biden and FEMA Administrator Criswell and the vast majority of the Northeast governors to discuss the pending storm. It appears on track to head further west, which means making landfall closer to Connecticut and Rhode Island, which means we should avoid the direct hit that we've been anticipating for the past couple of days. That's the good news for eastern Massachusetts and for most of Cape Cod and the islands. Eastern Massachusetts should not see the widespread hazardous driving conditions that we were worried about yesterday, but this is New England and it is hurricane season, so please continue to pay attention to your local weather alerts as the forecasts do tend to change. There's still the possibility of widespread power outages in just about every part of the Commonwealth due to high winds and the heavy rain. Across Massachusetts, we will likely see tropical storm force winds, which will be somewhere in the vicinity of 40 miles an hour on a sustained basis throughout tomorrow. Regardless of wherever you live, even if you don't normally lose power in a storm, you should be prepared to deal with the possibility that you could lose power in some areas for possibly an extended period of time. Deputy MEMA Director Pat Carnevale will have more to say about that in a minute. Buzzards Bay area could still see 3 to 5 foot storm surges depending on the timing of the high tides, so everyone there should be on the lookout for some minor flooding along the coast. And the same goes for some parts of Cape Cod and parts of the South Coast, especially around Westport. The new forecast also calls for significant rainfall Sunday into Monday, especially in Berkshire County, the Connecticut River Valley, and Worcester County. And the likelihood of flash flooding and washed out roads are a distinct possibility in these areas, especially given all the rain we've seen in July and recently this week. That means everybody there needs to use their heads as the storm moves through. Roads may be flooded completely in some areas, which means you shouldn't drive through them. You should still prepare for the possibility of power outages here as well. We're in touch with our partners throughout all of western and central Massachusetts, and we'll be ready to assist with washed out roads, debris cleanup, and power outages as they become necessary. Given the new storm track, we won't be calling up any additional National Guard assets or personnel. The assets we currently have are moving closer to Western Mass to assist there, or Central Mass if they're needed there. State Police will also be redeploying their extra teams to those areas as well. Looks like we'll avoid the worst of what we were preparing for tomorrow and Monday for most of the state, but everyone should still pay attention to the local weather alerts. It's been a long time since Massachusetts has had to think about a hurricane making landfall here. The last one was 30 years ago. Well, it looks like we'll avoid a direct hit. It's always a good idea to be prepared because predicting exactly where these go and how they play out and how long they stay is always an imperfect science. I want to thank everybody from FEMA, from the Coast Guard, and our partners in local government for helping state government do what we needed to do to get ready and to work through this. We plan and prepare for the worst and hope we never have to use those plans. And it may be that in this particular time, that'll be the case. But again, depending on the trajectory and the impact of the storm and how long it sticks around, we still need to be able to assist some of our neighbors in Rhode Island, Connecticut, and New York. And with that, I will turn it over to DOT Secretary Jamie Tesler.
Thank you, Governor. Good afternoon. This remains a storm system to be taken seriously in Massachusetts. The National Weather Service says Henri is now tracking to make landfall on Long Island or near Connecticut Sunday afternoon before moving into central Massachusetts and Berkshire County. While Long Island and Connecticut will likely be seeing the worst of this system, Massachusetts will still see significant impacts with heavy rainfall and gusty winds across mainly western and central regions of the state. Residents in counties west of Worcester to the New York border late Sunday into Monday may find roads that are impassable due to fallen power lines, tree debris, and flooding. Drivers should be especially mindful and avoid driving into floodwaters. Waters can be deeper than they appear, have strong currents, and may have hidden hazards like washouts down electrical wires or tree branches. Just 6 inches of water can stall passenger cars and create a hazard for drivers and first responders. Communities in coastal areas, especially Buzzards Bay communities and southern areas of Cape Cod, as well as Martha's Vineyard and Nantucket, may experience storm surges. In addition, coastal areas that get flooded during severe weather may be flooded, including Winthrop Parkway and Revere, where DCR has announced the floodgate will be closed Sunday at 11 a.m. This will mean Winthrop Parkway is closed between Broad Sound Avenue and Endicott Avenue from Sunday at 11 a.m. through Monday morning. The High Line and Steamship Authority service to and from the islands may be interrupted. Those customers should check schedules ahead of time on Sunday and Monday as the situation is changing, and depending on the forecast, it is possible that ferries may be canceled. Logan intends to remain open and operational, and passengers should check ahead with their airlines for the potential of cancellation or delays. The MBTA asks customers to check service schedules before traveling. As announced yesterday, the Green Line D-Line, and the Mattapan trolley lines will not be running trains on Sunday out of an abundance of caution. However, riders will be offered the option of traveling on bus shuttles. In addition, on Sunday, the MBTA ferry service remains suspended from the start to the end of the day of service. The MBTA is encouraging its customers to get service information by signing up for T-Alerts, following at mbta.com, at MBTA Commuter Rail on Twitter, or using the Commuter Rail app. If you must travel this weekend, put your safety first. Make smart decisions. Plan ahead. If driving, have a full tank of gas, and don't try to drive through puddles on roads, and do not drive through flooded areas beneath underpasses. Truck drivers in particular could potentially be impacted in some areas due to high winds within the storm system. It is not likely, but it is possible that we could need to restrict trucks and tandem trailers on major roadways if winds and gusts create dangerous conditions. We don't anticipate any restrictions on passenger vehicles at this time with this storm. The Commonwealth is prepared for the worst this storm can throw at us, but let's do our part and stay at home and out of the way if possible. Please plan ahead, keep an eye out in your local forecast, and postpone any non-essential trips until after the storm leaves Massachusetts. And at this point, I'm going to ask MEMA Deputy Director Pat Carnevale to come up.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Governor Baker, Secretary Tesler. The Commonwealth's response to this storm is dynamic and changes as the Hurricane Henri's track anticipated impacts. So basically what we're saying here is this storm has been all over the place at this point. So it started out in the west last night. It shifted a little bit to the east. So we have to be prepared that the storm still has time to move around. As the Governor mentioned, we've intensified our contact and coordination with our local partners. Actually, as we speak right now, both regional offices are reaching out to all the cities and towns within the Commonwealth to make sure they're all prepared. If there's stuff they need ahead of time, they're going to get that for them. As a Western Massachusetts resident, I can tell you, taking the flood risks very seriously, especially given all the rain we've had. About back in July 16th or so, the Western Mass and Northern Worcester counties were greatly impacted by some flooding there. And actually, we're in the middle of doing assessments when this storm started to impact us as well. So the rain that they've already received plus this rain will be definitely an impact to Western and Central Mass. Many of us who have dealt with flooding associated with Tropical Storm Irene in 2011, I was a regional manager back then, remember there was widespread flooding damage in Western and Central Massachusetts. The Berkshires, Franklin, parts of Worcester County, greatly impacted. All of our response partners will be adjusting their plans accordingly so that we can prepare and support not only these areas, but other parts of Henri's impact. There are still some storm surge conditions on Cape and the islands. The effects may be mitigated due to the surge coming in at low tide. But again, this depends on the track and the timing of the storm. Residents and visitors of southern coastal areas should continue to monitor the storm's path because we know it could shift. For the public, the message becomes more localized based on conditions where you live. In the area of the state where flooding is the highest risk, residents should monitor conditions closely and assure that receive emergency alerts on your cell phones. In your community, have reverse 911 systems, sign up, and make sure you're available for that. Make sure that you're on that list so when your community does send out a 911 alert, you're available and you can hear it. As the governor mentioned, do not drive or walk through flooding water or flooded roads. Do not drive around road barriers. They're there for a purpose. If they're there, they don't want you going through it, and going through it just makes it much more dangerous for the first responders that have to respond. The potential still exists for widespread power outages, and residents should prepare for them. Make sure your phones are fully charged. If you need medical assistance, if you're on medical devices, make sure you've reached out to your medical providers, your caregivers. Make sure that's all going to be prepared due to the outages. You don't want to be trying to deal with that in the middle of a power outage. If you have a generator, make sure it's equipped. Make sure it starts. First of all, make sure it's properly hooked up. Again, we talked about that yesterday. You don't want that to backfeed into the main system, so make sure that that's available. And as always, recommend, please have enough supplies on hand. You got to make sure that if the stores are closed due to power outages, you want to make sure you have enough supplies. We ask that all residents take time today to finalize their preparations, and please be safe and take care of your families. Thank you.
Questions?
So this is good.
This is definitely not the direct hit that many people in the forecasting community were anticipating a couple of days ago. In fact, a big part of the conversation that we had with the Northeastern governors and with the president was, I think, driven in some ways by the fact that the course of the storm had changed and the direct hits, especially around landfall, had moved south and west, and that meant a very different set of circumstances for the folks in Connecticut, New Jersey, and New York as a result of that, and a different set of circumstances, obviously, for Eastern Mass and for Western and Central Mass here.
So do you still think people should be off the roads on Sunday? What would you say?
I would say that no matter where you are in Massachusetts, I think you can go out, but you should be careful. I think the Cape is going to have a much less significant challenge than we anticipated yesterday. And again, I would repeat something that both Secretary Tessler and Director Carnevale talked about, which is this issue of continuing to tune into and check what your local weather folks are telling you and what your local community is telling you through their emergency 911 system. This thing may change again in some respects. I think one of the main points we want to make, though, is given all the rain we've had over the course of the past 30 days, the really significant amount of rain that's going to come with this, no one disputes that. We do have the potential for significant power outages across the Commonwealth, and people should plan accordingly on that.
And is that the biggest threat, power outages now from the storm, or do you think it's flooding?
I think statewide, the power outage issue is probably the biggest concern we have, just because when you have a storm of this size, it's going to cover, there may be power outages all over the Northeast, which will just put some real strains on all of the folks who are going to be in the business of restoring that power. I think the flooding issue is, at least based on what we see now, more of a Buzzards Bay and a South Coast issue, and not quite as severe as people originally anticipated. But remember, we have a lot of inland bodies of water that have absorbed 17 to 20 inches of rain over the course of the past 45 days. If we get a ton of that, which we anticipate in Central and Western Mass, you could see significant flooding, not just on roads, but also in some of our inland bodies of water as well.
Do you still expect 300,000 people without power during the storm, or do you think because of where it is now, maybe less?
I think we're going to stick with that assumption, the 300,000 assumption for now. Remember, it was 100,000 to 300,000. I think we may see some movement with respect to where it might occur. But again, most of that's driven by the combination of the wind and the rain, and especially all of the rain that we've had recently which has made many of those trees more susceptible to a storm like this than they would have been previously.
What's your message for people who see how nice it is outside now and think, maybe I don't need to prepare, maybe because
Yeah.
I haven't seen a storm in so long?
I guess my message to folks around the Commonwealth who look out the window, and I totally get it, it's a very nice day, would be twofold. Number one, this is New England. Things can change. What's the old joke about the weather in New England? If you don't like it, wait a minute, it'll change. I think with respect to this, the one thing we do have a fair amount of confidence about, even if people are still sort of debating the exact root of this, is the basically Sunday day and a big part of Sunday night into Monday morning is when people expect the weather will be at its worst. And I think for all of us in Massachusetts, to echo something both gentlemen said, people should just be careful and cautious about this. If you have to go out, be careful, plan ahead, and be cautious. I don't think our original concerns, especially around the Cape and the South Coast, with respect to the anticipated wind level and storm level, if that was in fact where the storm made landfall, has been lessened to some extent by the curve the storm took. But people still need to be careful.
You said you were ready to assist New York, Rhode Island, Connecticut. How so do you anticipate having to assist?
Well, I don't know if we'll need to or not, but we should all remember that there are mutual aid agreements that exist between and among all 50 states. And we've been the huge beneficiary of those mutual aid agreements over the course of the last 7 years. Mutual aid agreements made an enormous difference during the winter of 2015. They made a huge difference during the Merrimack Valley gas explosions. They made a major difference during the bomb tornadoes and the hurricane that went through the Cape a couple years ago. I have always felt incredibly grateful to my colleagues in the Northeast who, mostly through the National Guard, and it's usually gear and equipment and personnel that can run it, that's a big part of that mutual aid, then when we called them, they came. And if we end up coming out of this in relatively good shape, and there are significant issues in other states in the Northeast, and people pursue a mutual aid approach to this, we're going to want to be able to respond.
Last question. Governor Baker, what is more challenging, preparing for tropical storms and hurricanes or a snowstorm?
I guess what I would say is that they come, a tropical storm and a snowstorm come with different issues. I think the single biggest difference between them is the timing associated with the move to get all of the gear that these folks have to get out onto the highways and the roads at exactly the same time that everybody's trying to get home. There's a timing issue associated with that you don't have with respect to this. You never want to be in a position around snowstorms where you're literally sending everybody home at exactly the same time in the midst of the storm when all of that stuff that these guys have is trying to get out on the roads and clear them. You don't have that issue with respect to tropical storms, but most of the rest of it is pretty much under what I would describe as a framework of plan for the worst, make sure you've communicated with all the folks in local government and the other agencies that you need to, do the best you can to station assets in locations where you think they can be most helpful to help solve problems and deal with the power issues, the vehicle issues, the debris issues, whatever they might be. And then make sure you have enough folks who are talking to each other on a pretty regular basis once it gets started to make sure you don't miss something.
Because of the storm's changing track, are the utility crews no longer sort of focusing down on the Cape? Are they moving or?
Some of them are, yeah. I mean, we're going to end up with a very different geographical distribution of Guard personnel, cleanup crews, and even some of the public safety and DOT folks will be in different places as well.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. And if you go out tomorrow, be careful and stay safe.